Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Porochista Khakpour and Eileen Myles.
Hi, you guys. Thank you.
Hello. It's like the NPR voices. What was that skit where there were the two ladies on Saturday Night Live? They're like, hello. I just felt like I did that. Hello. I was like, hello. NYPL does that to you, I think, sometimes. I don't know.
Now I feel like I want to use an NPR voice.
Yeah.
So this is so great.
Thank you so much for doing this with me.
We've been sort of doing a ping pong friend-writer thing for a number of years.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll have an event for a book, and it's like, Porochista, would you read at my event? Yes,
Yeah,
I'm so happy and so honored to. And I think we met outside of a reading someplace and went spontaneously and had dinner because who is this person?
Yeah. Well, I always tell people, like, when I first came to New York in 1996, I wanted to go immediately to St. Mark's Poetry Project, and you had a big part to do with that, because I was like, I want to, like, be where Eileen Myles is, and Penny Arcade, and then later my friend Maggie Estep and all that, whatever. But I was like, Eileen, I'd been for years online, on message boards trying to figure out what was going on in New York. And yeah, blah, 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 there were still some beat writers and all that, but Eileen was like my icon. And so I still remember the cab coming from JFK. They were taking me to my, to Sarah Lawrence, where I was a scholarship kid. I said, can you somehow do a detour to go by St. Mark's Poetry Project? Because I just want to see. And somehow I felt like Eileen would just be hanging out there.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the funny thing is I kept going to the East Village the next weekends after that, and I would actually see Eileen, the dog, and recognizable, and I'd be like, hi, but then like too stressed out and embarrassed to say anything. And so then years later, like, I met you and I was like, oh my God. You were like, hi, I'm Eileen. I'm like, I know. So, I don't know. It's crazy when you get to like be in the same breath as your icons. So thank you.
And then it felt like we already knew each other, and instantly went to a horrible restaurant for dinner, kind of a weird crawdaddy or something. It was like, this is so today's the day. This is your launch. This is the absolute beginning of your amazing book, Sick, which is probably one of my favorite memoirs I've ever read.
Oh, thank you.
And I have a thought, which I think I shared with you earlier, which is that as it turns out, illness is the perfect subject. What do you think?
Yeah. It's funny because I've gotten variations of this question a lot lately about like, well, because there's a line in the book even when I say like, there's a line that I thought about crossing out, but like you say in your blurb, it's a diaristic book, and I wanted there to be a lot of honesty there and a lot of capturing myself, like not at my best, but off my worst. And I even say in there, like, I keep myself sick. And lots of people have asked me, like, what does that mean? Are you happy to be sick? I was like, no, I would like to not have this life. I would like to be how I'm in remission or before. That's not it. But it's interesting. Out of all my identifiers, this is the one people are the most comfortable with. So they'll see me in an airport with a cane, oxygen instruments, with a wheelchair, like I just did yesterday. And immediately all sorts of people are willing to connect with me and understand me and hear me. TSA, it's a whole other thing. They're like, oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, you have bombs? That's fine. You're in a wheelchair. That's cool. Oh, and then they're like, oh, what's your name? And I'm like, Porochista. Oh, where's that from? And then it's all over again. And then, oh, so are you, okay, how old are you? I need to figure out my age. Are you married? Nope. Are you, where do you live? Well, right now I don't even live anywhere. I'm kind of like homeless because my apartment in Harlem had all this demolition and debris, and I got lead and mold exposure, asbestos probably too, in the last few months. So then you just become more and more unacceptable, and it's depending on how much I reveal or whatever, and then it's like, oh, these are all the things that they don't want. If they could mistake me for like a certain type of white lady, they're used to having illness, then it's fine, you know. Even like I've written about like the fact that illness often makes me very thin and very pale, and that's sort of familiar to Americans, where just like a few months before that, if I'm like my natural color and my natural curves, it's like a whole other reaction. So it's it's illness is the perfect subject matter. I never thought I'd write about it, but my God, it's not only tied to American life. I would say it's also very tied to life in like global heteropatriarchy and all that. I mean, it's like, not to mention just like, I said to someone recently, like, it's gonna get all of us. Like, what are you so scared of? Why do you see this and you're freaked out? Like, all of us, if we're lucky, will go by way of illness. You know, there's much more tragic ways to go. But this is the best case scenario. You know, many years ago, I would have been dead. And probably all over the world, people like me just die and no one knows what happened. You know, in Iran, the word they use for tick is kane, which is just like a pest, but it also refers to like crazy people or unsavory people, kane, you know. And so, you know, who knows what would happen to you? You'd be thrown on the street or you would just die. And that is, by the way, happening with Lyme disease and all sorts of chronic illness all around the country. Because if you don't fit a certain narrative, you know, the medical, we have a very broken medical system, broken healthcare system, and I'm sure that's no surprise to anyone here. But it is, there's a lot of profiling involved. And it hinges on how you present and how you fit into this preconceived narrative. And so that's why we all have to complicate the narratives, as we do with all identifiers, I think.
I mean, the way in which people are, quote, comfortable with you as a sick person has to do, or maybe this is a question, but to my mind it seems like it's sort of about bringing the inside out, too. When we think about sick, we think about something we don't see.
Yeah, exactly. It's a funny thing because it's also like sometimes I have very invisible illness and no one will know. And sometimes it's like very visible. And I used to have ego things about that and like still struggling through places without my, you know, cane or wheelchair, you know, falling all over the place. People in my neighborhood used to see me fall all over the place. I'd be like, what's going on with you? And I'd say Lyme disease. Sometimes they would know, sometimes they wouldn't know. But yeah, it's funny. Like you are bringing well, it's also like even like think about mental illness as part of Lyme too. I mean, you know, it can be, at least in my case, certainly, you know, anxiety, insomnia, depression, PTSD that I had prior to Lyme. But certainly when you have a disease like this and you go through the mess with it, you're going to have some sort of, I just tell someone in New Mexico the other day, I was like, he was like, I don't have PTSD. I was like, you just went through like a whole list of body trauma you went through over the years. Like you've got PTSD. Like, you know, and in some of us, like my PTSD turns into really intense clinical OCD. So again, like our society will reward certain mental illnesses, like my OCD that's like hyper productivity or detail oriented or trying to do all this stuff. Oh, that's a good worker. That's a good American. Not just sitting at home. People often will compliment me for this when they meet me. Like if I'm in a wheelchair struggling to go give a talk for some money, they'll say like, oh yeah, that's good. You're like working really hard. And I'm like, I'm just doing it because I don't have any money and I have to give this talk. And this talk pays more than like 3 semesters of teaching, adjuncting, right? So I have to. And then they'll be like, well, that's good. Just keep on fighting, keep on doing it. And really what they should say is like, go rest a little bit, you know, or like take care, like sleep and eat. Like, but that's a whole thing in America, right? And in the West in general, that's, you're supposed to be like really productive to earn your keep as a person that breathes.
Was that a dude who said he didn't think he had post-PTSD?
How did you know that?
I mean,
Eileen?
I'm a good soldier, not a bad soldier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's totally, I'm a good soldier, not bad. And there's so much. I'll see people in IV wards, and you can tell, like, I've been in IV wards now for years, and you can tell the people that, like, are just, like, are going to have a hard time with the journey because they won't surrender, and they want to fight, and they have so much ego. And at a certain point, you can't, I was like that, I'm sure, at a certain point, but you got to abandon it. I've been like completely shameless and transparent for many reasons, but one of them is like, I can't really hide, Every time I do an event, like I was just telling you, Bex, like I could like pass out. I could throw up right here. I could, like, anything can happen, guys. Like at an ER, you guys could be walking me to an ER. There's no guarantee. I've done readings before where I had like panic attacks and things like that. I try to like hide it, but I regret trying to hide it. I regret that because I think we should be in touch with human stuff the more we can. Then that becomes normalized, not like our perfect game face all the time that looks a certain way, and like, I had the other day at the airport, somebody at TSA was, they're like lifting my thing up and then they're like seeing my legs. And they were like horrified that my legs weren't shaved. And I have like so many reasons for that, but like, I was like, yeah, can't shave my legs right now. And they're like, wow, it's rare to see that on that's cool, Guess the gender there, right? Rare to see that on a woman. I was like,
that is such a great word.
Yeah, and I was like, well, then you really need to look here. Just keep looking. Like, and he was like kind of repulsed, right? But I'm like, yeah, check it out. Like, that's what that is, Or the other day, like, a friend of mine was with me. I was like talking about my diarrhea with like really loudly in the doctor's office, and I was like, yeah, I'm having really like bad bowel control. And I was like, you're so brave. And I was like, but don't we all shit? Like, last I checked, remember when they used to say like women don't fart or something like that, or women just shit rose petals? I don't know. This is also fighting against my other culture too, by the way. Patriarchy is a serious thing in my Iranian culture too, and women are. My dad is always horrified that I curse. He'll never get used to it, so I keep cursing. Bad daughter.
I want to go into gender, but before we go into gender, I just wanted to ask about this attitude about illness, which is to say, is it mostly Western or mostly American? She is fighting the war against cancer. She lost the war. They're still, it's so. I mean, I kind of came up in my lifetime. I didn't hear it in the 50s or the 60s or I think in the 80s it started to begin the war.
Oh my God!
And is that every global
nuts.
or?
Yeah, you're a fighter, you're a this. I mean, I think so much about like cancer because, some of the, like Audre Lorde I loved and how Audre Lorde wrote about cancer in the cancer journals, but also just I have so many friends with cancer and they often are treatments with late stage Lyme and cancer overlap. And I just see that as like the most pernicious, that sort of like the good cancer patient versus the bad. Don't be negative. And that's what caused your cancer. I when I see that, I mean, people have had to like hold me back. I'm like, I'm just gonna jump on that person. I cannot. How dare you tell someone who is going through that they have to be a certain way? They can be positive if they want to. They can be negative if they want to. Of course, if you're in pain, you're not gonna be like, bless God for this pain. Pain is a wonderful teacher, Like, okay, you can that's a tactic. I've been there before too. But you can also just sit with the pain and be like, fuck, this sucks, and like be there. Like, that's really okay. We have to stop policing people's like attitudes and telling someone like, oh, they're a fighter because they always appeared this way. And then like if they cry, that's weak or something. Or I've seen such awful things in hospitals, and I've seen some awful things that even like with healers and psychotherapists and the pressures they put on people who are sick and the people around them, unethical things like not telling someone their diagnosis or hiding it because they think the mind, the mind is powerful, but you got to give people some credit. And you got to let them like toy with MO. So that's the thing I can't handle, like, am I being a bad fighter right now because the lead and mold really destroyed my system and I have C4 levels that are really bad? Like, did that my mind created that? Like, no. Would you say that to someone who got hit by a car out there? Like, oh, you weren't a good fighter. A woman gets raped or say, you we're not a good fighter. That's why I don't even know who they're talking about. They're talking about God did that? Like, I don't even know. I think they're just not thinking, that their thinking stops at a certain point. And they just say that because it's some way to make them feel better about their own mortality.
Mm-hmm. Well, the whole thing seems like this juggling act between knowing and not knowing, which is so symptomatic of the way you describe the having of an illness in here and encountering authority and authority endlessly telling you what it is, what it isn't, how to be, how to. So what's the act of, so this winds up for me being kind of a manifesto of all kinds of undoings of all that authority and all those ways of being. So what was the act of writing this like? I mean, you've written 2 novels.
Yeah.
And so suddenly you're writing a memoir about something that's inescapable.
It's funny. It's someone was like trying to ask me very leadingly that it must have been really healing. No, it was a nightmare in a lot of ways to write. I mean, it was something that I knew my readers wanted, but it was so difficult. And I wrote many different versions of it. I was looking at email. I'm one of those people who saves every email. I've every email since 2005. So I was going back to all these drafts. They're like journals, emails I sent, emails I didn't send.
Do you print out your emails? Or
No, but I wonder if I should.
So how do you save them?
I just keep them in my inbox, like 580,000, like, but more even, because those are the ones I haven't. Yeah, I just all there. So I was able to go back to emails from 2005, and I was able to analyze them, and I was like, here I am going to like therapist to therapist, and my God, those symptoms sound a lot like what I have now. That probably was Lyme there, maybe, because I don't know exactly when I got it. I'd been in 2009. I had tested positive for it, but they thought it was gone, And the IGeneX tests, which are fairly good, I only had that in 2012. I could only afford those tests for $4,500 back then. They're a little cheaper now. So I had a crowdfund then, as I've had recently, to pay for that. And so, what was the question again? I just like
well,
I had the Lyme brain.
It's about writing, but I just want to interject, like when you're talking about you don't know when you got it, and I feel like is that maybe a late part of or an early part of the narrative of us understanding an illness? Because I think with AIDS, at a certain point in time, people would certain populations of people would talk about how you got it.
Yeah.
And I think now nobody would talk that way. I think, or not in the same way. And I think perhaps with Lyme, how important is it to say when and how I got it, and what does that mean?
There's always hierarchies with Lyme. So the people who saw the bullseye rash, they're like the top caste, right? They actually saw the thing, and hopefully they have the right bands, meaning like they have bands 23, 41, and they're like unequivocal. They saw it, bingo, and then they could do like immediately get the antibiotics and maybe be well forever. That's possible. Often not. Then there's like the people that like think they like. I was like, maybe actually this one mosquito, because now they think mosquitoes can carry it too. Yay. This one trip in Mexico, could that have actually been bullseye? I don't know. But my whole book is I go crazy almost trying to figure out when it happened. It could have happened when I was a child, because in California they act like there is no Lyme there, but I saw a sign that talked about Lyme in the early 80s there, And so it was there. Still in California, there's doctors who pretend they've never heard of Lyme because they don't want to deal with it. Even some of the greatest Lyme experts, I've been in their office before, and I'm like, what about ozone and bee venom therapy? That's been really good for me. And they go, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'll be like, it literally says that in your book. Don't know. And it's because they get shut down all the time, by, I don't know if it's FDA, CDC, whatever it is. They're constantly escaping things. So there's all these like weird, worlds with Lyme where things are kind of underground. They're not exactly like FDA approved, but yet they're totally mainstream in Europe. But there's all this like network, and it depends on where you are. And sometimes you'll bond with someone like, oh, what's your co-infection? Oh, cool, yeah, I've got that too, yeah. Oh, or Ehrlichia, yeah. Does it cause night sweats? You do a whole thing. But the maddening thing is it's completely different in every single person. There's certain things that you might see, but it really has a lot to do with other toxins, exposures, PTSD. I mean, any vulnerability you have, like, was my air quality great up in my Harlem apartment? Probably not. Like, it's a number of factors. It basically goes for all your vulnerabilities. So yeah, it's a really funny thing. Like, I don't know if AIDS at one point was like that, but it is this funny world where there's also some people who live in places that don't have outlets for this discussion that still think it's like no one will believe me. And I have to tell them, like, actually, even the CDC now is kind of recognizing more and more, like, you know, when I go to an ER now, they're like, oh, okay, you're a CDC case, okay, blah, blah. We get it. They're a little scared when they know it's real. They kind of would rather you be just kind of like kooky, and then they could be like, oh, just put her on oxygen and some fluids and blah, blah, blah. But then they're like, oh, shoot, like then we actually have to take care of your system, God forbid, you know? So it's a big mess. There's I hope in our lifetime there's going to be like a way to deal with this in an organized manner, because it often feels like luck getting better. And my good friend Shaleka Jawad, who's like a brilliant writer and had cancer herself, you know, one of our first discussions we had, she was still non-remission from cancer, and she said to me, we were sitting in the East Village at a cafe, and she said, you know, we all used to say in some of the IV wards with the women with like leukemia, at least we don't have Lyme. And it was like, because there's no protocol, because you don't know, because doctors will differ. You go, I think there are some, definitely.
Can we wait till the Q&A for that?
Yeah. That's a controversial stance, and I feel like there could be protocols, but, you know, I've seen that we debate. It depends on where you go and who you talk to and all that. So yeah, it's not as neat as, say, some other chronic illnesses, or, you know. So we're still in the midst of that battle.
Can I ask about the gender thing, though? Because it does seem, to my mind, just socially, I just know, I can think of one man I know who's had Lyme's, and everybody, I keep pluralizing it, sorry.
No,
it's
we
Lyme,
used to say
Lyme.
that, Lyme's, yeah.
I think it's a Massachusetts thing. I say Heineken's too.
Yeah.
But women, what's statistically, what's the deal?
It's really, it's wild how many women do seem to have it. And I think the answer that I used to hear is like, well, women's bodies are very complex, and, you know, hormones, and, like, you know, which, okay, like, yeah, I guess, like, I don't, like, should we talk about men's prostates when we talk about Lyme? Like, it's like relevant, but not. But I think the real reason is that women aren't believed. And that's why I've seen, again, I don't know if there's perfect stats on this, but anecdotally, I know the people I've seen the sickest are like young femme women. Because they go into the doctor's office and the doctors are like, oh, do you have a boyfriend? Did you have a breakup?
Wow.
Do you have anxiety? Yeah, it's very common at your age. And, you know, and that's where the conversation, and that's kind of what I was like, you know, when I would go to doctors in my early 20s, and they'd say, and they would convince me that it was anxiety and depression. They'd want to send me home with some, you know, benzodiazepines, and like, just, you know, you need to, that's what that is. And I'd say, could you run some blood tests? And when I finally got to the point where doctors were running blood tests, a lot of things were coming up. Mm-hmm. And I see this all the time. A lot of these young, you know, femme women do not get treated in time. And then it turns into chronic or late stage Lyme. And then you have a real problem on your hands. And by the way, then you also have anxiety and depression and all the psychiatric things too. Because nothing is going to make you have that stuff more than not being believed, being gaslighted over and over and over again. You know, when I still go to a doctor's office, I'm like talking a mile a minute and really defensive, and like, here's my file, and I'm like, and they're like, are you all right? And I'm like, no, I'm not all right. And also, I feel like, it does feel like a battle for me. Like, I have to go in there defensively because I'm expecting you not to believe me. And some of my favorite doctors in the world have sometimes like patted me on the head and told me, you know, you're like a handful, and and they're like, oh. You know, there is a big gender dynamic here, and then add to that sexuality, right? And if you don't fit into some, like, you know, idea of what a straight person or a gay person, or if you're not married, or if they, you know, they take your sexual history, oh, you've been promiscuous. And I'm like, what's the magic promiscuity number? Tell me that. You know, what is it? What's the number you'd be comfortable with? You know, or like if you tell them you've lost track. oh no, you whore. You know, it's just, it's crazy. And it's like, you know, and I, like talking about bisexuality and queerness with a doctor can be so uncomfortable because they're just like, you can see like where their brains are going with that.
But the disease, and it seems like the disease itself is queer.
Yeah.
In all its ways of being boundaryless and being all over your systems, and it's like it shouldn't be there, and there it is. You know, we can't stop the thing. You know.
I love that. Yeah. We gotta take that back.
But the writing, like so how what were the ways you attacked it? Like you sold the book at there was a certain book you were going to write, which is sold.
Yeah.
And this is not that book, which I love. I mean, that's always the case, writing a book, right?
Yeah.
You start writing one book, and it winds up being this whole other thing, and do you get to write that other thing? So what were the modes of attack? It's many things, but one of the things it seems like is a travel book. And I feel like that seems like part of the surrender of it is all the ways and places. But tell me how it...
Yeah, it's sort of divided up in settings, and we didn't know how we were going to do it, but it was like, that became a way to like figure it, because I was always moving. I've been transient. I'm a refugee, and I've never stopped being, in a way, like, I'm sort of like homeless right now between homes, but it's something I've been like my whole life, living out of a tiny suitcase, moving, going for a teaching job, moving with some partner, you know. Yeah, it's been, so at one point, the book that I sold, and it's kind of funny to think about this right now, is that I really thought I was better. And every time I go into remission from Lyme, it's like I forget. It's incredible. Maybe that's Lyme brain, as we call it too. But I thought, this is going to be great. It's like, and you too can triumph over Lyme. Mm-hmm. You know, and I don't even know what I was thinking. Was I recommending like organic food or just like mind over matter? I don't even know what that book was going to really do. It was going to talk about this, but perhaps a blessing of the book, and I use that very lightly, is that I got into a car accident. I had a concussion in late 2015. And I was already a little late submitting the book because I just wasn't hitting the right chords with it. I was digging up the emails. I was like trying to put it together, but it just didn't seem right. And I don't really like my self-books that are like, and then everything was great. Like, but I thought I maybe had to do that. I didn't know what I was doing. And then the concussion came, and I had a severe concussion. I was at NYU Concussion Center 3 times a week for months. And that was when I wrote the bulk of the draft you see. I threw out a lot of the other drafts. And then I was like...
You mean because you had an injury and so you had to stop? And
it actually helped me, I think, with the concussion. Like, I was like, it almost became a mental exercise. When I couldn't work anymore, I was like, I've got to do this. I've got to write this. And I also thought maybe I have a limited time because the concussion was doing crazy things to my body and spirit. I mean, it was the hardest thing I've been through. And then I thought, like, what if the book doesn't really have an ending? Like, what if this is it? And that's a funny thing. Like, a few months before, like in fall, I was like very much in remission, like doing my yoga, trying to go to the gym, eating whatever I want, you know, whatever. And I was like, oh, it'll be so great for the book tour. And then Lyme decided not so. In December, you know, I came with this remission. I got all these exposures. And I got worse and worse and worse. And I didn't expect to be in this shape. This was not how I envisioned it. So it's like you just don't know. And so the book that I think I have now is a more honest one. It doesn't put a bow on it. It doesn't offer you a solution. It doesn't say how to, but I hope, and some of the readers who've been reading it right now have been saying this, I hope it'll make people feel less alone. We're in the middle of it and struggling, or maybe they're even out of it, but they'll remember it. You know, I don't know, maybe it's Buddhist. I mean, I think like life is suffering, right? And how we cope with that, you know, is a continual practice. So for me, that was the thing with this book. Like, you know, wherever I went, there was myself, and life only got harder, and it continues to be a challenge.
Yeah. And it feels like two kinds of intimacy. One is the one with you personally, which is just incredible. I mean, it's just, I know you. I've met you. We've spent some time together, but I know so much about you through this. And the other is a writerly intimacy, because so I know you, so you feel kind of a bit like a parrot on Porochista's shoulder, watching you go through all these physical symptoms and experiences, but then writing it, But it's in a way, it's sort of like a little bit like being in a workshop with you, watching the book come into being too.
Well, I wanted to talk about the writing thing too, and one of the reasons was I thought a lot about Styron's Darkness Visible, which is a really intense meditation on depression. I thought two things that he did. First of all, he talked about himself being a writer. It opens up at some fancy awards thing in France. I'm not there yet, but he was a writer, and he talked about being a writer with depression. And I thought, why not? And then he also named the meds that hurt him. And having someone like that give me permission, because it's so out of vogue to talk about you can't name the medication that hurts you, as if we have to protect the medication, as if we have to coddle the sweet baby, drug. Like big pharma must be more protected than us. Like, no, I mean, I'm not anti-medication, but I think we should be honest if something didn't work for us or did, or we should be honest about everything, ideally. So that was one of those things in there. So I felt like I wanted transparency and candor, and I also wanted that writer's journey, because writing a book is hard. Mm-hmm. And if you have neurotoxins or cognitive defects, also hard, and so harder. So it's I wanted that, and also I wanted to talk about the economic challenges too, because believe it or not, writers are not rich. Surprise. And that was relevant. It affected every part of my life, being a writer. So I've wanted to be a writer since I was 4. That's the only thing I've ever wanted to do. So, and I want to be a writer in New York, and that was, yeah.
I mean, New York is huge in this book. I mean, it's so funny because the book goes to all these different locations, but this is an absolute nugget of I just love the word cosmopolitan in this book, because it seems like it's where you came to begin, to go to Sarah Lawrence, to begin to be a writer, to have these, attachments to various neighborhoods and places and people that define becoming a writer. And then it always seems like wellness always means, and it's so weird, like New York is such a sick place, but coming back to New York means reality, wellness, home,
Yeah, I love this city so much. It's just crazy. I mean, I feel like I have to decide if I can continue to live here to get better, but I love this city with all my heart. I mean, I think this is a city where if you're ill, people will help you. If you need to reach out to someone, there's people there. I think we learn to live with each other. We all live on top of each other here all the time, right? And we know how to talk and hear and be there for people. I mean, I loved New York before I'd ever set foot here. Mm-hmm. And writers like you are part of that. Your work was introduced me to New York. And the funny thing is, it didn't disappoint. That's the interesting thing. Writers could make everything sound good, but you guys were honest about this place, and it didn't disappoint. And so, I love that narrative. I feel worried and protective about New York right now, because I'm now finally a generation older than the young people, and I'm like, oh, don't ruin this place. What's going on? No, gentrification. All that stuff is constantly on my mind, but.
And will we have libraries, by the way? I think every writer I know has such an attachment to the library, and we learn to be writers through being readers, and
That's
these
right.
incredible shrines of literature, and
Yeah.
to even live in New York City and maybe wonder if the government supports the being and the space and the existence of library, keeping them open for hours and hours.
Yeah, we have to make sure they do, and we are that's the thing that we have to remember as New Yorkers too, is that this is a city that God, I've promised myself to not rant about Trump, but how do you not? It's even in this book, kind of the last minute with edits, I had little Trumplandia critiques put in there, but it's we have to take our power and assert what we want out of our spaces. And I would hope, obviously, everyone here at NYPL wants libraries, wants books, wants culture, knows the value of those things, that those are not extras, that those are what makes life worth living. I have to remind myself of this. Sometimes my students think, oh, the arts, they're just frosting on the cake. You live without them. And I think at one point I even I was a low self-esteem writer. I was like, this doesn't save anyone, what we do. But I don't think that at all. And I think, you know, we have to fight for it, and we can't kill ourselves fighting for it. I was getting in activist mode. That was literally killing me this winter. And but we have to remember our power and take our power and to spread these reminders to those younger than us, some of those older than us, you know, whatever. But remind them that this is what we love, and this is why we love this city. It's not because of this new skyscraper that's coming up or sort of gilded Trumplandia insignia all over this, you know, that's what we protected New York from, is like the capitalism, you know. It's obviously a capitalist center of like the world, but I think we who are here who've loved this city, we developed ways to cope with that and to make it intimate and loving and not just dollar signs.
And I think the books that we write and the art that we make is a real, pure, beautiful act of resistance. And it's also a knowing. It's like this book is such an inventory of, you know, like being a writer and what the effects of this illness on the body of the writer and the city, and it's all into. I mean, I found myself watching. I saw Cindy Anderson's film about Kathleen Hanna, which winds up being all about this female art career, and then bam, you know, she has this encounter with Lyme, and one of the ways that she knew it was she said, "I lost my bullet." It's like she knew through her art that she had an illness, you know, and I think that your inventory of this illness kind of extends both the art and the knowing.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure. I mean, I've been so lucky to be part of like Cindy's like new documentary on feminists with Lyme, and that watching The Punk Singer was amazing. I really recommend it to you guys
It's
if
an
you
incredible
haven't.
film.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's about Kathleen Hanna, who is frontwoman of Bikini Kill and more recently Julie Ruin and lots of great bands. And then it's also very much a story of chronic illness and Lyme disease. And it's really interesting and beautiful how it weaves that stuff together. And I remember when I saw it years ago when it came out, I was just like, man, I understand so much of this, like in a really raw way, because she's doing like video journals and all that. Now I'm doing video journals for Cindy, and it's been really life-saving for me, because I'll go back and look at the journal, and for one thing, I can see like inflammation in my face sometimes. Sometimes my Lyme is very much lodged here. But I'll also like hear my voice and see myself crying. And one, I'll be like, oh man, so that was worse. And then I'll see another one where I can barely talk. And I'll see another one where I actually am in good shape. And that reminds me of like a progression, not just, there's a way with human beings, we just think this moment is everything. As much as we know it's not, we feel trapped in a moment. And for the last like month and a half through really intense treatment, I've just been like, I'll never get better. I was telling my doctor this, oh no, this is it. Now my Lyme is gonna turn into this and that, and this was the one that killed me. But having those video journals, so if you have chronic illness or Lyme, I really recommend that to you, to keep on your own and watch them again.
I think it's time now to hear from you guys. We have a microphone floating around, and I think...
Thank you so much, Eileen, for everything. Thank you.
This has been great. Thank you.
You're amazing. Thank you.
Do you see anybody that you want to...
There's a gaggle, and this somehow energetically, it's all like here.
It's up to you.
Sure. Yeah, the microphone's going to come to you.
We'd like it for the recording.
Okay, I don't know how this is going to come out because I'm not used to this, but I'm very sensitive to you because I've had Lyme disease detected over a 40-year period because I used to walk through Long Island in the bush.
Sure.
I was a bicycler in Long Island, and then I used to go bicycling in a very infested part of France with Lyme.
Wow.
So I've had it on my skin. I've had that red dart. I've even, in my bicycling, swallowed them. They just sort of zapped into my system.
Yikes.
And there is a cure for Lyme disease, but you have to be ready to just do the cure for Lyme disease. There's a place in Germany. I'm 64 years old. I don't have Lyme disease anymore, and I've been detected 3 times over a 40-year period with Lyme disease. So know that there is a cure for Lyme disease. If you're ready to do what you need to do, like for so many things, the work for Lyme disease, I'm focusing on you because I have a sister who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she also has mold disease. So she has mold disease and Lyme disease, and I have a very difficult relationship with my sister. I'm just saying this. And I'm not going to go into something to denigrate what is going on here in the stage. So there is a way to deal with this, but you have to do the work, and you have to be ready for other things than maybe what you're choosing as your protocol. Another problem I have...
I'm just, yeah.
And another problem I just have, if I can finish, is using the feminist argument for a lot of pretext to talk about a subject that is completely different in a way, for me, from feminism, because I've been a feminist for almost 50 years. I'm 64 years old, and I started early. So if you want to go back to Kate Millett, Simone de Beauvoir, Adrienne Rich, there are Andrea Dworkin, a number of other people that really were the forefront of feminist literature.
I think she's allowed to invoke feminism without going to the same direction as you, Andrea.
I think it becomes a screen for the illness also. That's it.
Thank you.
I mean, there's many generations of feminists.
If you want to find out how to cure Lyme disease...
Thank you. Thank you.
I will say this about that. I have, I know at least 6 people who've been to the same clinics as yours, and they're not well, by the way. And there's multiple clinics in Bavaria and Germany, and people spend a lot of money and they go there. And by the way, my doctor uses,
Andrea,
now I'm talking, thank you. That they do almost all the same treatments they do in Germany now all over the United States, by the way. So.
Andrew, it's the beginning of the conversation.
They do. Yeah, so it's beware of people with outdated information because a lot has changed in the last couple of years. So why are you even here? You're welcome to leave. If you're so disturbed by me, this is free country and there's an exit sign right there. Yeah, I don't judge people who take all sorts of roads with Lyme, and there's not a cure.
Jen,
Thanks for
could
sharing.
I ask a question?
Sure.
Good. Well, you mentioned something about someone making a movie about women with Lyme.
Mm-hmm.
This is news to me. Could you elaborate?
That's Cindy Anderson, who's actually here filming and not filming anyone in the audience, but filming us. But that's the same director who did The Punk Singer. So that will be coming out hopefully in the next year or two or whatever. We're still working on funding for that, and so and hopefully that'll be one of many. I think it's an important topic.
Somebody way back there in the corner.
First of all, thank you so much. I'm a little nervous to talk because I just actually relapsed. So it's been
I'm so sorry.
a little tricky, but I'm getting back through 2 weeks of herxing and I feel really good. So I really appreciate you even being on this stage and able to talk to us.
Thank you.
As a femme-looking but queer-identifying young person who's dealing with late chronic, whatever you want to call it, Lyme, how do you find the balance between feeding into the trauma and the PTSD of the situation, but also the importance of remembering, like you said, journaling and that whole thing is a coping mechanism. How do you find the balance between that?
It's so hard.
I know.
And also thank you so much for being here and to sharing that with us. I know it's not easy, so I adore you already for just doing that. I know how hard it is. And if you guys don't know what herxing is, it's the die-off reaction. It's really, really, really painful. I've been bedridden from that many times in the last few weeks. I have too. So I really thank you for even being here and standing up and asking that. The balance is really, really hard to find. At certain times, I think I can strike it, and then I can't. Sometimes journaling feels actually traumatic because I'm revisiting over and over what it is. And sometimes it feels helpful, but it actually changes for me. You have to kind of evaluate where you are at a given time. I often tell my students that with free writes and stuff. You might have been an afternoon writer at one point. You might have been a morning writer at one point. You got to see where you are right now. And that's also really helpful for me. I try to let go of the past. I've tried to work with other Lyme people to let go of the past. Who you were a month ago or the last time you relapsed has no relevance to where you are now. Your chemistry constantly changes, depends on what you're taking, depends on how much air you're getting. The body, the mind the liver and kidneys are constantly healing themselves and then causing issues, So I try to just say, you just have to go forward as much as you can and take this day as the beginning rather than to constantly go back. I think when journaling can be destructive if it's constantly just a way to ruminate and to say, wait, but this happened to me. That's my tendency. And doctors have had to tell me, let go of that, let go of that. And the more I can let go of that, I sometimes embrace Lyme brain, that my memory's bad. I think that's a godsend, I'm I don't remember what happened last time. And it infuriates people sometimes, but then I think that's also lets me be in the moment, which was always hard for me, and lets me just think with a clear slate, as much as I can. But, I'm sitting here, I'm in all sorts of pain, and you become sensitive. Just even that woman's tone there, I was I feel it in my back, and thank God I'm on oxygen, gonna get through it. But it's, you have to respect wherever you are and have friends and advocates. God, that's important. And then hopefully doctors that believe you and hear you, which I finally have, so.
Hi, Porochista. Mabruk and congratulations. I'm so happy for you
Love
that
you,
your
Mona.
book is out. Love you tons. And I wish you the best success with this book.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, this woman fucking infuriated me, and I just wanted to go out there and just take care of her. But I was shut up, Mona, this is not your event. Shut up, shut up.
Mona could have, I was just I don't know if I'm blessed or cursed with patience sometimes, but
But I just wanted to tell you that I love you, and I'm so happy that you're here and sharing so honestly. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And to kind of just, what I was feeling when she was talking was this, and I don't know her story obviously, but this need to deny and this need to push and to just say, no, if you want, if you choose. She kept saying, if you choose, as if you can choose yourself into getting better.
Yeah.
That must be so fucking infuriating. And that's all part of what you were saying about not being believed. she was all those male doctors who don't believe you, but in woman form. I'm woman, you're a woman. What are you doing? Fuck the patriarchy.
Yeah.
So,
well, I always say white supremacy and patriarchy, it affects everybody. Everybody. You don't have to be white to internalize white supremacy or it's everywhere. So I hear that stuff and I'm wow, okay. I know who, yeah.
Like Bell Hooks says, white supremacist heteropatriarchy. It's very long, but very important.
Yes.
So how is it, do you think it's because she's so frightened of what it was that she wants you to also deny it, or what is that?
I think the most generous interpretation I've had things because it does happen often, and it has to do with, I think, fear of I'm well now. I don't want to see the sick person. Mm-hmm. You've kept yourself sick, or I've heard this from my family, or I want a distance from that. And, I hope those people are well forever. I hope I meet a lot of them who at some point I saw them and they were I'm well. And I was probably like that at one point. But then they get sick again. And then they've really lost the coping mechanism because they feel betrayed by the cosmos, their bodies, all that. And I think there's a different road you can take of acceptance. My whole thing is I just the only hate I have in the world is for bigots. I don't really feel hate for anybody else. But I hate people who hate, and so I see fear and hate is very much related. And that is something to be wary of. So when I hear that, and I hear this really strong reaction, I think, oh, this is a person who's that fearful. And like, it's sort of like, part of me is like, fuck them. But a part of me is like, my heart goes out to you. I hope your journey is better, because I don't hear wellness when I hear people attack people. I have a good friend who has Lyme who's often attacking people all the time. And she's like, I'm better. I'll never be sick again. I'm like, that's not how wellness sounds to me. Rage and denial and shutting down people, that to me is not mental health or wellness. It's, to me, there's something dark there. There's plenty of things to hate. There's a lot of bigots. And there's a lot of disease. We can hate the thing, but we don't have to hate each other. So that's where, yeah. I don't know. God, there's
There
so
was
many.
this person right here.
Yeah.
Hi, Porochista. Thanks
Hi.
for being here. I just wanted to ask you a bit about social media, because I know that before the book, it was a way for you to kind of talk about some of the things that you're talking about in the book. And I'm kind of wondering if you feel that it's helpful now, or maybe harmful, or if that's changing over time, and if you see your relationship to telling your story about Lyme on social media changing.
It's funny because, it's like social media depends on how you use it. It could be good, it could be evil, blah, blah, And I know why a lot of people have left social media. I mean, I'm thinking of Twitter, where I have the most followers, and it used to be Facebook for me, where I would reach out with illness stuff. But I think for disability, and especially disability for women of color or queer women, the Twitter has historically been better. Yeah, why is Facebook so... I just answered the question in my head. I was like, heteropatriarchy, like Zuckerberg, it's like was started by a guy who wanted to rate hot girls, right? Like that. This is why, like, it was hard for them not to, like, have their binaries on that. But, I think it's been really helpful for me. I think it's very privileged to be able to completely get off social media, and I don't have that privilege. I need to be able to reach out to people. I need to be able to check in on people. I need, we did a crowdfund for, my friends did a crowdfund for me like last month. And like mostly it was Twitter, like in 4 days we reached the goal. And so, I do think social media is, drives me nuts sometimes. It's where I get white supremacists like attacking me for breathing all the time. I was telling Eileen, like, I've done events where we know that there's like cyber stalkers and cyber bullies, and I did one event recently where earlier that day Richard Spencer was there. It's like these are real people, like, and they can be dangerous, and so that's the thing. I mean, there's one person on Instagram messages who keeps trying to get me to give him my address because he's going to come and take care of me and nurse me to health. And then I think to myself, well, like, what if I was 16, would I have just been like, I'm desperate? Would I have been like, okay, I don't know. You just have to be really smart about it. So we have to be really like social media literate, and we have to teach that to people around us. And it doesn't have anything to do with age. There's plenty of people like my age who don't know anything about it, and but we do need to get people to understand how to use it and how to be smart about it. I know a fake account now pretty fast, or I'll know if someone is a Russian bot now, right? Or we've all learned that interesting lesson. They're pretty good. I mean, there were a lot of those Bernie supporters that would come after you. Turns out they weren't Bernie supporters. They were actually like Russian bots, and that's why they would be so weird with their responses. I was like, who talks like this? These can't be real Bernie supporters. It turns out some of them were just these like weird MRA or Russian bots or something like programmed. I don't know. So you just have to be smart about it. But I won't go off social media. I've taken some breaks before, but even that I can't really afford to do. I've never had like even a bestseller. Like I have to advertise these things. I've never earned out on a book. I've never had any of those like measurable success things. So, but I also like it. I've been on, I was on like message boards, like I said, like learning about New York, and who was hanging out there in the mid-90s. I would pretend I was doing my homework on this crappy computer my dad had borrowed. And instead like talking to people on message boards about like, hey, what music do you like? What's like, I didn't know. I was in South Pasadena, California, which is like not far from downtown LA, but we had a pretty provincial culture of prom queens and like, no one was out and nothing was, I didn't know how to connect with the rest of the country. And that was my way of being like, please, I used to say like, please tell me what are people in the East Village doing? I just want to know that. Like, what's cool in the East Village? So I could somehow like scrape it together.
We have time for one more question. What do you want?
Gosh. I don't. Yeah, there's someone here maybe that's been asking for a while. Yeah.
First of all, thanks so much for doing this today. This was kind of mesmerizing. You and I share a similar culture. And so this is probably such a big question for a last question, but to the extent that you can answer it, would you like to talk to what it's like to have a chronic illness coming from the sort of culture that we have, where I think a lot of times things are hidden, or at least things that you wouldn't necessarily tell everyone. And you're so brave about talking so much, so honestly about what's going on with you. I wonder what sort of either cultural support or reaction you've had.
When you say we share culture, is it Muslim culture or is it Iranian? Okay. Yeah. So I think I seem pretty socially acceptable to certain very conservative Iranians. I mean, I've heard them say it. I was on the cover of Poets and Writers once years ago, and I had ripped jeans. I thought looked good, whatever. And a couple of people wrote in being like, how embarrassing that one of our daughters is on the cover with ripped jeans. I was like, whose daughter? And like, those were actually kind of like not cheap jeans. Those were like my nice pants, It's the cool professor with the ripped jeans. I don't know. It's maddening. I think Iranian culture is very similar to American culture in a lot of ways. We have a big country. We are not in touch with like Afro-Iranian culture, which I know like so a lot of my relatives share. That was never really discussed. Iranians never want to say why they'll say like, well, there's black people on the southern coast. How'd they appear there? On the southern coast. Okay, you don't even have to know a lot of history. There's weird racism in that culture. There's sexism. There's like homophobia. There's transphobia. All that stuff is there. Iran is probably the most American or Western of Middle East in a way. You could say this for Saudi Arabia too, of course. But it's just like and extremely capitalistic more than you think. I mean, these mullahs are very good at playing a certain game and making you think that's not the case. A lot less religious too than they appear. So yeah, there's a lot of problems with our culture, and I want us to be open about that and talk about that. I love Iran, I love Iranians, and I want us to be better, and I want us to be healed. But there are definitely issues, and I had to just Iranian men would write me from Iran. You had the potential to be beautiful, or they write to me like, oh, you're so simple, you don't wear makeup, how great. Like, wait, what's wrong with the person that it's just like misogyny. The other thing that I was talking to Eileen in the back though, like something I really like. I think Muslim culture is extremely beautiful, and I think a lot of Iranian culture is extremely beautiful. We have a very long history. One of the things I love is like we don't have pronouns.
That's so great.
It's not that whole pronoun debacle in America. Oh no, is it he, she, they? How will I handle it? There's a whole language out there. There's few where we don't care. My parents have always called me he, she, it, whatever, like my whole life, and it's like they can't get anyone's so there's some really progressive things. And, we've had a lot of very famous iconic poets who were queer and fluid in many ways. And so there's a lot of beauty there. I don't think we should, I hope that people don't buy into the current political cat and mouse game that's been going on for decades with Iran and the US. I hope they can see past that and see Iranians for who they are, just like they should see all sorts of people for who they are. I had a wheelchair agent, a Sudanese Muslim woman yesterday who started apologizing. She didn't know where I was from. I'm Sudanese Muslim, but not. And And I knew I've done that myself sometimes. I'm Iranian, but not not those. And then I was like, no, you're beautiful, you're okay. Like you just have to forget the leaders of these countries. They're just all trash. I think we can agree that all the leaders in the world, I don't know what country has a good one, I haven't found it yet, but they are not good, and you have to love the people of these countries, and a lot of times they're trapped in places that they don't want to be, that don't serve them, but, love the people on the ground, hear the people on the ground. That's what I think. Yeah. Thank you so much again, and Eileen, I just can't thank you enough. I almost felt like I couldn't do the launch when I was worried about my health, but it was just such a dream to do this with you, and I thought no one would come. So I'm kind of just, thank you NYPL and Erica, thank you so much. This just means the world to me. Thank you.
Love you. Thank you.